Yes.
With you.
Well, thank you all for this presentation, which were inspiring, really. I've been intrigued by your question, Bas, why people don't know more than designers. And I think it's a crucial
the other way
question.
around, no?
Why do people know?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Why they don't know?
Why we don't know.
And
That's
what we don't know, exactly. So I wonder, that landscape is usually a collective product. So it was done among the scientists and so forth. So the question that came after, to me, it was, what if we have a design without designers? Huh? Would do it better? And then I was also stricken by the idea, of this appropriation of the people of the landscape. They were taking what was not given. So who owns the landscape? Very difficult question, but also what we saw in the last presentation with the cloud seeding. Who owns the landscape? Who owns the atmosphere? Who can transform and alter the landscape? Which is very difficult to achieve. But when you see such programs of cloud seeding at a national scale, at the continent scale, you become really afraid of. And then another question was related that you were showing all these images that of landscape which were altered. There were some kind of alteration of the landscape. And the implicit question was, can we make the most from what we have? Can people, like we were saying, they were showing images in which they were making the most? Whatever it was, this landscape has already altered, has already transformed. So, many questions, but maybe Lisa want to add or?
No, I think they have to, that's a question. I think it was to you.
Yeah, well, it's a question that you ask more to a designer than to a photographer at the moment. So the designer part of me is somehow, it's there, but let's say the knowledge is much more now in being a photographer. And being a photographer in this case means that I think that you can only be connected to a place that you can see with two eyes. As soon as you need a diagram, as soon as you need an aerial shot from it, you as a person cannot connect to it. And you cannot feel the stories, you cannot, I speak as a photographer now, this is what I have learned. I can, if I go in the air, for instance, I was trying to photograph, when we were living in Singapore, I was trying to photograph palm plantations in Indonesia because, of course, I would like to photograph. When you're inside, you have 3 trees. It's a beautiful, enchanted forest idea, but it's 3 trees, or 10 if you're lucky. If you fly, but at least you understand what is the reality of the thing. As soon as you go up, it becomes a pattern, you become removed, it becomes beautiful, you become enchanted in another way, but you lose the effect that you as a person have when you are inside. So I think it is deeply impossible to say, can we solve all these things in this big scale? How do we do that as designers? As a photographer, I would say we have to stay on the ground. And we have to really stay on the ground and understand with multiple eyes. So I think your question about why do these people know more than a designer? Because they have multiple eyes. They are multiple eyes on the ground. And they are not, let's say, seeing from the map, this could be nice there, this could be possible if we tweak it a bit like this. So this would be somehow maybe a lead up to an answer from, let's say, from my perspective after I was a designer. No?
Thank you. I'll answer through 2, let's say, skills of relevance. In my former tenure, I programmed a park with a lot of different people, 5 hectares, where we really asked, what do you want to do as a citizen? And I would nearly say that so this vacant lot of 5 hectares was activated by people who still wanted to reconnect to the land. And they carry the stories and the knowledge, and we just were enablers as cultural figures. Now, we shouldn't be too nostalgic or romantic about that, but there is something in just asking people to pick up on where they left. And where they left is just very engaged with their surroundings. Now, how does one scale this up, obviously? Because the skill that Eline is touching on, and this notion of stewardship, is obviously also a cultural one. And what I see, the second aspect I want to touch on, you mentioned effect. I think we're entering an age of affect, where we are moving beyond the cognitive sensing, but beyond the cognitive or the analytical, but we're really starting to reappreciate the body also, in all its senses. I see this a lot with my students, that they totally, let's say, see the bankruptcy of only a rational approach. So lastly, for instance, in our projects, what we are doing is doing systemic analyses and, let's say, emancipatory strategies, in the hope that through this, a certain critical mass can be met to maybe find an answer to this large and systemic, well, it worries me. I mean, I knew about it, but not in such great detail. This preliminary research was very, very daunting. And I personally made an exhibition called Mass Paradox with Posat. And I started that I, again, read an article on the director, the CEO of Unilever, stating that water was not a common. In other words, it is a monetary reality. Well, that was a shocking wake-up call.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
Talking about the shocking wake-up call, I think it doesn't happen very often that we have curators, directors, arts here. And Delft Technical University of Technology, which I'm representing, by the way. And what was shocking, let's say a wake-up call, but on the other hand, like a punch in the stomach, is the following. You, ladies and gentlemen, like from the arts, actually design. That's what I made out of it. In the sense, like, you move ground. There is a rigorous, and you as well, Elisa, because you research, let's say, the unexpected. And there is this, what is the core, and then comes the question. There is a rigorous research. There is a method. You said, I loved it. You know, when I feel, you know, when I understand that I'm not going in the right direction, you know what I do? I turn the camera on the other side. And so do you in constructing the narratives. The point is, now that you are here, and that you have this kind of freedom and at the same time rigor in the method, how do you see a possible use of design representation to create really a constructive dialogue within this place that uses inquiry to get solutions? And whereas I feel the way you work, it's to put questions. And this is quite a shift. You also, Satya, said, well, that we are many sorts of designers, different designers. But we do communicate differently. The references are different in order to understand those images. So how could we, you know, make this today here, the fact that you're here, the start of the bridging of this world of art, which seems free to be political, and the world of technology, who needs to solve the problem?
My gosh, what a large question.
Sorry,
No.
not much answer.
Maybe I pick up on this word solution.
Brava, thank you.
I think we have to acknowledge that that we're probing into the unknown. And solutionism in the sense of the modernity of things, I think, is something that we need to question in and of itself. And I think through the question we can, in fact, come to get further. My nicest, I made a lot of exhibitions on, for instance, Mansholt, and I interviewed 80-year-old farmers. They know so much about the contradictions in legislation, what is happening to their soil, what is happening to their cows. Right, the cow in 1955 would give 25 liters. Now it's nearly triple. So is that the same cow? One could wonder. You know, they know a lot about technology. Well, returning to your question, I find I love the field of architecture. Really, I love detail. I love matter. I love the fact that the immense responsibility and entanglement of complexity that it is living in. Yet, I also want to stress that it's quite conservative in a particular manner.
Yes.
I'm just saying that if it's not me, it's just recently the Technical University of Amsterdam did scrutinize the field. Who gets paid what, where? So I think maybe my first answer would be aware of the representation. We are all cultural conditioned entities, but at least try and put effort in being aware of your own biases, being aware of your own frame. And then, of course, you can start to maybe look into how do you represent your worldview and make sure that possibly there's, well, people of color or women or other entities involved. And what was the other point I was going to make? Yes, maybe try to see through your materials. Mm-hmm. So by which, well, if we see Elise, her marvelous, scrutinizing of a system, one could say, I think we have the obligation to really try and see through the materials that we use and be aware of the systems we reproduce.
Yes, I'd like to bring in the story of Elise again on the Sky River and try to connect it with the, let's say, the viewpoint of Bas, firm on the ground, 2 eyes into reality. Because the first time I was, let's say, pointed to policies like this, a sort of geoengineering policies in China, was the Dutch artist Esther Kokmeijer, who indeed, she enlisted in one of these Chinese weather stations where there is a university connected, and her project was, after 3 months of study, firing a rocket with silver iodide to the clouds to make them rain or snow or whatever, and with her little backpack go into the woods, the wilderness, to find back the remnants of the rocket she just shot and took them back to the Netherlands. And I think that in a way she did what Bas possibly would do, see what it's really like out there. But on the scale where Elise is showing it, it is sort of the critical zone. You are talking about gardening the critical zone, and it sounds very poetic that in the Tibetan plateau, the rivers of the earth meet the rivers of the sky. But in a way, this is a grand scheme that, you intimated that, Elise, on a very nice way, have a sort of sorcerer's apprentice danger that is really beyond description. And I'm afraid that the TU Delft has an enormous amount of Chinese students, and when they are going back to China, they're the most hardened modernists that you ever saw. So TU Delft can be proud on its on itself. But Elise, how do you look at the sorcerer's apprentice dangers of the Sky River?
Well, thanks for the question. I heard most of it. I think some of the parts I didn't quite hear so clearly, but I think you also referred to, it was the project of Vapor, where the artist traveled
Yeah.
and took meetings with the Chinese Meteorological Agency, yeah?
Yeah, that's indeed. It was the project of Esther Kokmeijer, I think some 12 years, 13 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's been, I mean, there's so many things that have been so both fascinating and obviously problematic and a little bit concerning about this research. But one of the main takeaways is really that before the start of the project, so for example, what Esther, I can't remember her last name, what Esther was looking to in this sort of earlier iterations of the cloud seeding work in China is not unique to China, right? I mean, this is something that happens around the world. This is something that multiple, governments and agencies have engaged with for some time, just at a different scale. And that's been for a host of reasons. One is honestly, the efficacy is not proven yet of cloud seeding, so to speak. It's very hard to prove how effective these are. But the other is, and this is where Skyriver as a phenomenon and as a project is different to us, because it really, it's almost less about the possibility of it working. And it's much more about all of the ways in which scientists, government, and other interested actors work together to try and convince a public and each other, frankly, that this effort is worth retooling and, their infrastructure, existing infrastructures, is worth creating new ones, is worth, imagining new ones. To us, this is, I think, what's most intriguing, which is to say that, again, it's not that we think it's going to work or that they know it's going to work, but instead it's trying to understand, maybe this touches on also what someone was mentioning earlier, and I'm sorry that I couldn't tell who it was, but that this sort of speaks to desires in some ways, what we think we want and what we think we need, and we is referring to many different we's in that context, but there's this incredible quote from Lauren Berlant, I think, and it's something about how we need to make new desires. But I think what the Skyriver project is doing is exposing already existing desires. It's tapping into already existing desires. It's just happening to do it in this seemingly spectacular way and at a spectacular scale. But I should say that, in the presentation of this work, this is the position of scientists and government, but there is a lot of disagreement within and dissent within the Chinese context. A lot of people don't believe that this is a worthwhile way to spend government money, and it doesn't have this sort of air of approval necessarily from all people. So I don't want to portray that image, but I do want to say that I agree with this sort of idea of the kind of, the sorcerer's apprentice, but there's definitely a kind of deployment in this idea of something that's knowable but not yet known, for example. And so I think that's maybe.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elise. We have to close off now. Yeah, thank you very much. We sure hope that this reasoning is not going to end in like the former Secretary of State of the United States, Rex Tillerson, the CEO of Exxon, said, well, climate change, it's only an engineering problem. And, it could end up there Thank you very much. We have to close. I just heard from Tanea. Tanea, what are we going to do next?
Panel for the generosity of the speakers today. Dirk, thank you so much for joining us and guiding the discussions. Thank you all for attending this morning's session. Again, my apologies that I have to be this strict, but we have to follow with the afternoon session. And because we are fully blended, it means that we have, well, to be very close connected to the program in the afternoon. So thank you, Elisa, for joining us again online.
Thank you.